The invitation came through unofficial channels. A DM on Instagram from Maluma's verified account to Karoline's personal profile. Let's have a real conversation about young leadership, the message read in perfect English. My new show, Royalty Talks, wants to feature voices that matter. You interested, Mommy? Karoline stared at her phone screen in her White House office, immediately suspicious. Maluma, the Colombian reggaeton superstar, had never shown interest in political discourse. His brand was built on luxury, women, and party anthems. Not exactly the demographic for serious policy discussions. It's obviously a setup, Emma, her communications director, said while reviewing the message. He's probably planning to make you look foolish in front of his 60 million followers. But Karoline was already researching. Something about the timing felt deliberate. Maluma had just launched his new media venture, positioning himself as more than just a musician. He was trying to become a cultural influencer, a voice for young Latinos worldwide. Look at this, Karoline said, pulling up financial reports on her laptop. His new media company, Royalty Productions, received $25 million in startup funding from investors in Panama and Colombia. But the source of that money is interesting. Emma leaned over her shoulder. What do you mean? I mean the shell companies funding his media empire have the same registration addresses as businesses flagged by the Treasury Department for suspicious financial activity, Karoline replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Someone wants him to have a platform, and they're willing to pay a lot of money for it. The more she dug, the clearer the picture became. Maluma's sudden pivot to political commentary wasn't organic. It was funded. And the people funding it had reasons to want certain narratives promoted and others discredited. He thinks he's setting a trap for me, Karoline said, closing her laptop with a decisive snap. But I've been preparing for this conversation longer than he realizes. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder marked Confidential Treasury Department. Inside were documents that would turn Maluma's trap interview into his worst nightmare. Accept the invitation, she told Emma, but make sure they agree to broadcast it live. No editing, no delays. Emma looked concerned. Are you sure about this? If you're wrong about whatever you think you found— I'm not wrong, Karoline interrupted, touching her silver cross necklace. And it's time someone held these people accountable for using their platforms to launder money and influence while pretending to care about their communities. 3 days later, Karoline sat in the back of a black SUV heading toward Maluma's private studio in Miami. The facility was impressive, a converted warehouse with state-of-the-art equipment and a set designed to look like a luxury penthouse. As she walked through the entrance, she could hear reggaeton music pumping from the main studio. Maluma's team was everywhere: stylists, producers, social media managers, all buzzing with the energy of people who believed they were about to witness a political takedown. Karoline! Maluma's voice boomed as he emerged from a side room, arms spread wide in an exaggerated gesture of welcome. He was dressed in an expensive designer tracksuit, gold chains gleaming under the studio lights, his signature bleached hair perfectly styled. Welcome to my kingdom, baby, he said in accented English, pulling her into an uncomfortably close embrace for the cameras that were already rolling behind-the-scenes footage. Thank you for having me, Karoline replied professionally, noting how his team was positioning themselves to capture every angle of their interaction. You ready for some real talk? Maluma asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Because I don't hold back, you know? I ask the questions your American media is too scared to ask. Karoline adjusted the leather folder under her arm and smiled back. I'm looking forward to it. I brought some questions of my own. The studio set was designed to intimidate. Maluma sat in an oversized leather throne-like chair, elevated slightly above his guest seat. Behind him, a wall of gold records and awards created a backdrop of success and power. The lighting was arranged to make him look larger than life while casting shadows on whoever sat across from him. Welcome to Royalty Talks, where we keep it 100, Maluma began, speaking directly to the camera with practiced confidence. Today I have Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary ever, a woman who thinks she can speak for America while representing the most controversial president in history. The live stream counter showed over 2 million viewers already watching across multiple platforms. Comments were flooding in from across Latin America, most expecting to see the young conservative politician get destroyed by one of their biggest cultural icons. So, Caroline, Maluma said, turning to her with a predatory smile, let's start with the real questions. How does it feel to work for a man who has called Latinos rapists and criminals? It was exactly the kind of loaded question Caroline had expected. I work for a president who believes in legal immigration and border security, she replied calmly. The same policies that countries like Colombia have to protect their own citizens. Maluma laughed dismissively. Colombia? Baby, you don't know nothing about Colombia. You've probably never even been there. Actually, I have, Caroline said, opening her folder slightly. I was there last month meeting with President Petro about anti-narcotics cooperation. Interesting country, beautiful people, complicated financial systems. Something in her tone made Maluma's smile flicker. What's that supposed to mean? It means I learned a lot about how money moves through Colombian businesses, Caroline replied, her voice still pleasant, but with an edge that made the studio crew lean in closer. Especially money that needs to be cleaned. Maluma's producer, watching from behind the cameras, made a cutting gesture across his throat, but Maluma was too focused on maintaining his dominant position to notice. You think you're smart, huh? He said, leaning forward aggressively. Coming into my studio, my kingdom, trying to lecture me about my own country? I'm not lecturing anyone, Caroline said. I'm just curious about your business model. Royalty Productions is quite an operation. $25 million in startup funding is impressive for someone whose last album didn't even go platinum in the US. The comment hit its mark. Maluma's jaw tightened, and his carefully constructed persona slipped for just a moment. My business is my business. We're here to talk about your boss's failed policies. Are we? Caroline asked, pulling a document from her folder. Because I thought we were here to have a real conversation, as you put it. And real conversations include real questions about real money. She held up a bank statement with several highlighted transactions. Like these wire transfers from your production company to accounts in the Cayman Islands. 47 separate transactions totaling $18 million over the past 6 months. Maluma's eyes went wide. You can't just wave around private financial documents on my show. These aren't private, Caroline replied calmly. They're part of a Treasury Department investigation into suspicious financial activity. Public record, once you know where to look. The live stream comments were exploding. Viewers who had tuned in to watch Maluma embarrass a politician were now witnessing something completely different. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey had brought receipts. You want to talk about failed policies? Caroline continued, standing up from her chair. Let's talk about the policy that requires American citizens to pay taxes on their worldwide income. A policy that applies to anyone who wants to do business in the United States. She pulled out another document. According to IRS records, you've earned over $50 million from U.S. tours, streaming, and endorsements in the past 3 years. But you've reported less than $2 million in taxable income. Maluma shot up from his throne, his face flushed with anger and panic. This is ambush journalism. This is not what we agreed to. No, Caroline said, her voice rising for the first time. What we agreed to was a real conversation. And the reality is that while you've been building your brand as a voice for the Latino community, you've been stealing from the American taxpayers who fund the programs that help immigrants and working families. The studio had gone completely silent, except for the hum of cameras and the distant sound of Maluma's team frantically making phone calls in the hallway. But tax evasion is just the beginning, Caroline said, reaching for another section of her folder. Because the money you've been hiding isn't just about avoiding taxes. It's about hiding the source. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Maluma stood frozen behind his throne-like chair, his gold chains catching the harsh studio lights as sweat began to form on his forehead. The live stream viewer count had exploded to over 5 million people across platforms, all watching what was supposed to be a simple interview turn into a financial expose. The source, Caroline repeated, pulling out a thick stack of documents. See, when the Treasury Department investigates suspicious financial activity, they don't just look at the amounts, they trace the origins. She spread several papers across the glass coffee table between them, each one marked with official government seals and classification stamps. "These payments to your production company," she said, pointing to highlighted entries, "they didn't come from record sales or concert revenue. They came from shell companies registered in Panama, the same shell companies used by the Medellin cartel to launder drug money through the entertainment industry." Maluma's face went completely white. "You're lying. You're making this up to destroy me." "Am I?" Karoline asked, pulling out her phone. "Because I have Agent Martinez from the DEA on speed dial. Would you like me to call him right now and ask him to explain Operation Reggaeton Wash?" The studio erupted in whispered panic as Maluma's team realized they were witnessing their star's career implode in real time. His manager was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but Maluma seemed paralyzed. "You see?" Karoline continued, her voice calm but relentless. "The cartels learned that they could use popular musicians to clean their money, pay them through fake production deals, concert sponsorships, and media investments. The artists get rich, the cartels get clean money, and everyone pretends it's just the music business." She held up a photograph that made Maluma stumble backward. "This is you at a private party in Medellin last year. That man next to you? That's Carlos El Financiero Vasquez, the cartel's chief money laundering coordinator, the same man who signed the contracts funding your media company." "I don't know who that is," Maluma protested, but his voice cracked with desperation. "I meet thousands of people at parties." "Really?" Karoline pulled out another document. "Because according to your own text messages, which were intercepted as part of the federal investigation, you called him mi hermano and discussed cleaning the money through the music." The live stream comments were in absolute chaos. Fans who had idolized Maluma were watching their hero get exposed as a money launderer. Music industry insiders were frantically calculating which other artists might be involved. "The most disgusting part," Karoline said, her voice rising with genuine anger, "is that you used your platform to influence young people while secretly working for the same criminals who are destroying their communities with drugs and violence." She pulled out a final document that made Maluma sink into his chair. "This is a contract between your production company and Servicios Medellin, agreeing to promote certain political candidates in Colombia and Mexico. Candidates who, if elected, would reduce anti-narcotics enforcement." "You're insane," Maluma whispered, but there was no fight left in him. "This is all fake." "Is it?" Karoline asked. She turned to address the camera directly, speaking to the millions watching live. "The young people who look up to you, who buy your music and follow your social media, they deserve to know that their hero was being paid by drug dealers." She stood up, towering over the slumped figure of what had once been one of Latin music's biggest stars. "You invited me here to embarrass me, to make me look foolish in front of your audience. But the only fool here is someone who thought they could launder cartel money and never get caught." Maluma's phone started buzzing frantically. His legal team, his publicists, his record label. Everyone was trying to reach him as news of the live stream spread across social media and news outlets. "The FBI raid on your Miami mansion is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Karoline said, delivering the final blow. "But your accountant, your manager, and your production company partners were arrested about 20 minutes ago." Maluma's head snapped up. "What? Did you really think this interview was the only thing happening today? You destroyed your own life the moment you decided to take blood money from drug dealers. I just made sure the world found out about it." The sirens were no longer distant. Federal agents in tactical gear burst through the studio doors just as Karoline was gathering her documents. The lead agent, a stern man with DEA emblazoned across his vest, approached the set with practiced efficiency. "Juan Luis Londoño Arias," he called out, using Maluma's real name, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, and providing material support to a criminal organization." Maluma didn't resist as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He seemed to be in shock, staring at the cameras that were still broadcasting his arrest live to millions of viewers around the world. "Agent Rodriguez, DEA Financial Crimes Unit," the lead agent announced to the cameras, clearly understanding the global significance of this moment. "This arrest is the culmination of an 18-month investigation into cartel money laundering through the Latin music industry. The studio had transformed into a crime scene. FBI agents were seizing computers, phones, and financial records while Maluma's team was being questioned and, in several cases, arrested themselves. The evidence provided by the White House press secretary's office, Agent Rodriguez continued, was crucial in building our case against what we're calling the Reggaeton Cartel Network. Karoline remained standing calmly in the center of the chaos, still holding her folder of documents. She had known this moment was coming, but seeing it unfold live on international television was surreal. Mr. Londoño's media company, Royalty Productions, was essentially a front for laundering approximately $200 million in drug money over the past 3 years, the agent explained to the cameras. The funds were disguised as legitimate business investments and production costs. As Maluma was being led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Karoline with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You planned this whole thing, the interview, the questions, the timing. Karoline met his gaze without flinching. I planned to expose the truth. You planned to use your platform to help drug dealers while pretending to be a role model for young people. This is Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI, another federal agent announced, approaching the cameras. We want to assure the public that this investigation extends far beyond Mr. Londoño. We have identified at least 15 other artists and entertainment industry figures who were part of this money laundering network. The revelation sent shockwaves through the live stream audience. Comments were flooding in from fans of other reggaeton and Latin pop stars, wondering if their favorite artists were also involved. The scope of this operation was unprecedented, Agent Chen continued. The cartels were essentially buying influence in the entertainment industry, using popular artists to promote their political interests and normalize their presence in legitimate business. Maluma's manager, who had been trying to coordinate damage control from the sidelines, was now being questioned by federal agents. His phone had been seized, and investigators were already finding evidence of his involvement in the financial schemes. The most disturbing aspect, Agent Rodriguez added, is how these criminals use the trust and admiration of young fans to further their illegal activities. Artists like Mr. Londoño were paid millions to influence political opinions and social attitudes in ways that would benefit cartel operations. As Maluma disappeared through the studio doors, surrounded by federal agents, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. One of Latin music's biggest stars had just been arrested live on television, exposed by a 27-year-old press secretary who had simply done her homework. The live stream was still running, now showing federal agents cataloging evidence and interviewing witnesses. The viewer count had reached over 8 million people across all platforms, making it one of the most watched live events in social media history. There's something else the public should know, Karoline said, stepping forward to address the cameras one final time. This investigation revealed that the cartel money wasn't just being laundered through music. It was being used to fund political campaigns, social media influence operations, and even fake news networks across Latin America. She opened her folder one last time, revealing documents that would extend the investigation far beyond the entertainment industry. The network we've uncovered reaches into politics, media, and business at the highest levels, and we're just getting started. 1 year later, Karoline stood at the podium in the White House briefing room, addressing a packed crowd of international reporters. The investigation that had started with Maluma's arrest had grown into the largest entertainment industry corruption probe in history, spanning multiple countries and involving dozens of high-profile figures. Operation Reggaeton Wash has resulted in 73 arrests across 8 countries, she announced, reading from prepared remarks. We've recovered over $800 million in laundered drug money and dismantled a network that was corrupting the entertainment industry on an unprecedented scale. The list of arrested celebrities read like a Latin Music Hall of Fame: reggaeton stars, pop singers, producers, and even several prominent social media influencers. All had been using their platforms and business ventures to clean cartel money while building their public images as cultural leaders. Most importantly, Karoline continued, we've broken the cartel's ability to use popular culture as a weapon against law enforcement in democratic institutions. A reporter from Telemundo raised her hand. Ms. Levitt, critics say you unfairly targeted Latino artists. How do you respond to accusations that this was culturally motivated? Karoline's expression remained professional but firm. Corruption has no culture, no nationality, and no genre of music. We followed the money and the evidence, not demographics. The investigation included artists and business figures of all backgrounds who were participating in these criminal networks. What she didn't mention publicly was the personal cost of her actions. Since that day at Maluma's studio, Karoline had been living under enhanced security protection. The cartels had put a substantial bounty on her head, and several attempts had been made to intimidate her family and colleagues. But the results spoke for themselves. Maluma was now serving a 30-year sentence in federal prison. His music had been removed from major streaming platforms, his business empire had been dismantled, and his assets had been seized and sold, with the proceeds going to anti-drug programs in affected communities. "There's something else I want to address," Karoline said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "That day, Maluma tried to use his platform to embarrass me, to make me look foolish in front of his millions of followers." She paused, touching her silver cross necklace. "But what he didn't understand is that when you stand for something real, when you have genuine principles, you can't be intimidated by fame or popularity." The crowd of reporters leaned in, sensing that this was more than just a policy statement. "The young people who looked up to these artists deserved better," Karoline continued. "They deserved role models who actually cared about their communities, not criminals who were helping to destroy them with drugs and violence." A young reporter from a Colombian newspaper stood up. "Ms. Levitt, how do you think this investigation has changed the relationship between entertainment and politics in Latin America?" Karoline's expression brightened slightly. "I think it's taught people to look beyond the image and examine the actions. Real influence should be used to help people, not exploit them for criminal purposes." She pulled out a letter written in Spanish by a young man from Medellin whose community center had been built with recovered cartel money. "This letter is from Miguel, age 19, from Colombia," Karoline read, translating as she went. "He writes, 'Thank you for showing us that our heroes should be judged by their character, not their fame. Because of your courage, we now have a safe place for young people to learn and grow instead of being recruited by criminals.'" Karoline folded the letter carefully. "That's why we do this work. Not for headlines or political points, but for Miguel and thousands of young people like him who deserve leaders who actually keep their promises." As the press conference ended, Karoline reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational day in Miami. Maluma's empire had crumbled, but something more important had been built in its place: accountability. The entertainment industry had been forced to confront its role in money laundering and corruption. New international regulations required transparency in celebrity business ventures and charitable foundations. And young people across Latin America had learned that their heroes should be judged by their integrity, not their social media followers. Most importantly, the investigation had sent a clear message to criminal organizations. Using celebrities and popular culture to launder money and influence politics would no longer be tolerated, regardless of how famous or influential the perpetrators might be. Karoline walked back toward her office, her silver cross catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the White House windows. She had been mocked for her youth, criticized for her methods, and threatened for her courage. But she had also helped recover hundreds of millions of dollars and broken a criminal network that was corrupting an entire industry. As she often told young people who asked for advice, "Don't let anyone convince you that having principles makes you naive. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be intimidated by people who mistake fame for power." The man who had once called himself pretty boy, dirty boy was now learning that actions have consequences. And the young woman who had walked into his trap with nothing but documents and determination had proven that sometimes the most effective weapon against corruption isn't violence or intimidation. It's the courage to speak truth to power, no matter how famous, wealthy, or dangerous that power might be. The investigation continued, with new arrests being made regularly as authorities followed the money trail deeper into the criminal network. But the message was clear: the age of celebrity immunity was over, and accountability had a new face: young, principled, and absolutely unafraid.